Welcome to the Maura Sweeney Podcast. Maura is an international speaker and the trademark ambassador of happiness with a passion for personal responsibility. She weaves insightful questions with personal stories to challenge your mindsets and empower your best and happiest self from the inside out. Here's Maura with today's podcast for you.
Are you responsible? Well, if you're on a path to living happy from the inside out, today's question will give you something powerful to think about and also to act upon. Are you responsible? There are several meanings for this word, and I want to give you a few of them. Responsible involves being able to be trusted or depended upon, to be reliable. It's also based upon or characterized by good judgment or sound thinking. Good judgment or sound thinking. How about this one? Capable of making moral or rational decisions on one's own, and therefore answerable for one's behavior. I want you to think about that one. How about this one? Pretty obvious. Being the source or cause of something. The source or cause of something. And lastly, responsible means involving personal accountability to act without guidance or superior authority. The reason why today's word responsibility or responsible is so powerful is because if you want to be happy from the inside, you're going to want to own your own behavior, own your thinking, own your words, own your intentions. And that involves thinking about what you do rather than just doing things without thinking about them. Remember when you were a small child and you wanted to go out and do things and maybe your parents said, no, you can't because you're not old enough? Well, we oftentimes think about age as being the defining element for knowing what to do. But it really isn't age as much as it is the idea of being responsible for one's own behaviors and being sound in the decisions and the way in which we think about those behaviors. I oftentimes like to think about this. People who don't like being responsible for what happens to them in life or what comes of them in life enjoy blaming others. So in a sense, the blame is, it's all about them. If they didn't do that, it wouldn't have happened to me. Well, have you ever heard the old expression that it takes two to tango? I've discovered that in my own life over the course of time when I would find that I was experiencing the same unfortunate outcomes. Maybe the faces or the details had changed, but essentially it was the same outcome. And I remember thinking, wait a minute, this is becoming a familiar pattern in my life. So therefore, what role am I playing in this dance? You know, for two people to tango, you've got to be walking or moving in tandem, where one person does something, but the other person is playing their part in the process. So let's get back to this whole idea of responsibility. Responsibility is, in a sense, owning our part in something. And when we can do that, then we can be aware enough to make adjustments that will look not only to the here and now, but also to outcomes in the future. And when we can be responsible for ourselves and for our actions, we naturally can feel happier and more at peace. I want to give you two anecdotes that will lend some credibility to this whole idea of being responsible for oneself, and also the idea of engaging in the tango. And sometimes it's necessary for us to pull ourselves out of a tango dance with other members of society so that we don't find ourselves playing a role of so-called victim. The first was me. When I was 19, I was a young co-ed who took a bus from my home area of New Jersey up to Boston in a later evening to go back to school after, I guess it was a springtime break. And when I arrived at the bus station in Boston, I had a 10-minute taxi drive, which to me at the time didn't seem like much until I got into the taxi and within a few minutes, discovered that the taxi driver was interested in the fur coat that I was wearing. What I didn't realize at the time was that it was his way of engaging me in conversation. Well, my parents had bought me the fur coat. It wasn't like I was wearing a dress that was revealing or that I was trying to show myself as a sexual being, but something in this man's mind thought, ooh, I have a young woman in the car, and how can I take advantage of this situation? Well, after I had answered a few of his questions and realized he was going in the wrong direction, asking about boyfriends, I got very quiet. I was in his car for an hour and 20 minutes. He refused to let me out, and fortunately enough, I ended up being able to jump out of the car when he was going to pay a toll getting off the highway to take me somewhere where there were trees. Now, in that situation, I could have said, oh my gosh, I'm such a victim. Oh my gosh, I'm not going to trust another taxi driver in my life. Oh, I'm not going to trust another man because maybe all men are out after women, or maybe they want to rape them. Do you see how we can get ideas like that in our mind? What I remember learning from that experience, short of, wow, was I lucky that I got out of it, but that I would be more mindful in paying attention to conversations others were leading me in. And it didn't mean that I wouldn't be ill at ease, let's say, in future taxi drives. But I would have my antennas up and I would be more responsible for self. In my case, maybe for divulging too much of personal information or whatever it might be. Now, I want to give you a second example. Came from a friend of mine. He's my age, black guy, and he was telling me a story about his son, who's now in his early 20s. My friend said to me, Maura, growing up, my wife and I always brought up our kids to just be like everybody else. He said if you were to listen to them speak, he said we didn't teach them ebonics. They weren't brought up like gangsters. They were brought up to be just like everyone else. He said, but when my son ended up in a more rural area of Georgia as a young man, he befriended some young people, also black, and also in a part of Georgia that was more, can I say, like going back in time. And what he realized is that over time, this son started adopting an opinion of himself that he never grew up with. He started seeing himself maybe as a member of a gang. He was wearing his pants way down. He was talking maybe in the ebonics and the gangster rap kind of conversation. And he said, my son started complaining to me that the police were always stopping him and his friends in cars. And he started sounding like a victim and a blamer of the white policemen that were after him. And he said, Maura, I had to tell my son he needed to dial it back. He said, for one thing, I told my son we didn't bring you up to speak that way. He said, secondly, look at the way you dress. And he said, thirdly, you're 6'7" tall. He said, I want you to think that, yes, maybe there are things being done down there in Georgia that shouldn't be done. He said, but you need to also take stock of what role you're playing. In other words, what part of this tango dance you're engaging in that's contributing to your feelings of being, let's say, under a place in society where you don't want to be. Now think about that in terms of your own life. Are you going around in circles dealing with situations where you are looking to blame someone or something other than yourself? Where can you in your own life take stock and think, am I making moral and rational decisions on my own? Am I answerable for my own behavior? Am I characterized by good judgment or sound thinking? Chances are that there's even one small thing that if you can see in your own life to make a change, to make an adjustment, you will feel happier and more sound and more at peace from the inside out. So I hope today's podcast will give you something very profound and powerful to think about. And I'd love to hear back from you. Write to me with some of your thoughts on today's podcast of Are You Responsible at Maura@MauraForYou.com. Well, that's been my thought for you today. Until the next time, this has been Maura with Maura for You.
For more insights on living happy from the inside out, subscribe to this podcast. To learn more about Maura, visit her moraforyou.com website, where you'll find videos, blogs, books, and the Foundations of Happiness self-study e-course. Maura, 4, letter U.com, where Maura is always for you.